Welcome back to Getting to Know You. I'm very excited about our guest this week, Kathleen Cullen, who is a Seb's parishioner, also the former director of campus ministry at Divine Savior Holy Angels, and starting a new initiative in her life, which is Grief, Grit, and Gratitude. I got that right?
Yeah.
Hi,
yes. Hey, John.
How are you?
Good. Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah, no problem.
We have known each other a long time because when you worked at Divine Savior, you worked with Lisa, and so I've like watched your whole progression and been impressed with all of the work that you've done, and definitely see you as a friend, but also loving watching like your family at church and your growing family, all the new things you're doing.
My family at church, I don't know if that's the one to watch. It's kind of hard to wrangle them, but
exactly
the basketball is our friend.
Exactly what I want to watch at church.
Yeah, COVID's complicated it a little bit, that whole church behavior, but we'll get there.
Oh yeah. COVID complicated a lot of things for sure. But so thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. I know you're busy and you got your hands full and you got all sorts of things you're doing, but I appreciate the time to talk for a little bit. And my first question for you is, Kathleen, for anyone that doesn't know you, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I grew up in Milwaukee, and I went to parish in Wauwatosa, but then we also always belonged to St. Catherine's too. From my parents did both, so I grew up going to Christ King and to St. Sebastian, and then went on and was actually Lisa's student at DSHA High School, and then went on to Marquette University and studied. I changed a few times, but I ended up studying theology and secondary education. And when I was at Marquette, I would just always take advantage of any opportunity to do service in the community, to do mission trips. And I had the opportunity to study abroad in Cape Town, South Africa as well. So that was a huge part of my formation, just in terms of understanding as much as I can post-apartheid South Africa and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and how that's really shaped my work, my life, and just choices for my family, including being a member at St. Sebastian.
Well, tell me more about that time in Cape Town.
Yeah, so it was a semester, and it was a service learning program. And so it was classes that we would take, and one of them was like the theology of reconciliation, forgiveness, and peace. And then there was also the service component of it, so you had a placement. I was at a school in one of the local townships doing more like communications work with the students because of the trauma that they had faced every day, and everything that's happened and continues to happen with AIDS and just other public health issues in South Africa. So we lived in community, like the other students and I, so we all lived together, and then we had different placements. But there was a lot of reflection and just processing of, South Africa, the place, learning about Nelson Mandela, having the opportunity to meet Desmond Tutu. So it was more so, great, obviously life enhancing and changing moments, but also just the ability to process and to know that like through that experience we have a responsibility to so much more, because you don't pick how you're born, but you can pick how you spend your time after that, and the communities in which you are a part and how you spend your time. So that's kind of a long answer to your short question, but basically it was a very transformative experience in my life.
It was a great answer, and I have two follow-up questions.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's great.
How did you choose to study there? And then I forgot you met Desmond Tutu. That's pretty awesome.
It was pretty awesome. I chose to study there because I figured it would be a place I couldn't go it would be harder to get to later in life. And it was a lot of convincing with my mom. Like she was nervous as a single parent. She didn't know enough about it, but I knew I had a close friend who had done it the semester before me. And then I also I worked at the service learning office at Marquette. So I was familiar with the program director, and I kind of just did this whole like lobbying thing with my mom where I would just introduce her to South Africa. And then she ended up coming, which was so cool. And now you would think, Mom, if you see this, but you would think it was her idea at times. So it is funny how those things go. But I would say that for me, I was so just like interested in it and reading about it. And also being at Marquette and like being in the city of Milwaukee, just trying to understand even like our own city and things that happen here. And so I think it was both. And I also recognize it as a privilege, but I did work a lot to pay for the experience too.
Of course.
Yeah.
You also spoke so well about just the responsibility that we have as people that are given a lot. It reminds me of people who maybe have watched last week's interview with Rocky Marcoux. He talked all about that too, that, you know, we have great responsibility to do what we can to, you know, make the world a better place. So well said.
Exactly.
And good work.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. And Desmond Tutu, that was, how'd you get that up to?
That was, I mean, he was pretty involved in the start of our program since the year that I did it. It's now like Marquette and other Jesuit universities have partnered, so you can go and be part of the program from other schools. But my year was the last year it was just Marquette students. And so when it was formed, Judy Mayotte was one of the women who started it, and she knew him. And so like she got him involved and kind of got him connected, and we took classes at the University of Western Cape, which is like this is the terminology that they use, but it was like the Colored People's Institution or school versus going to the University of Cape Town. And so it just everything about the program was trying to learning to understand, walking, you know, in different, you know, like going to Robben Island, seeing Nelson Mandela's jail cell, learning about what had happened, and then also seeing how things were now. And I think for me, it was like so recent in history, I could envision it even more than like the civil rights movement, which now I have spent a lot more time like reading and reflecting on. But I just think it's our responsibility as humans to know like how our actions impact one another, and not just humans, but especially obviously as Christians, like Jesus is that example for us. And so I think obviously it's even more present now. I mean, it's never gone away, but I think that it's so critical that we talk about it and that we learn about it and that we say, I'm sorry, I don't know, or I'm learning, you know, and just like having that honest communication. So
right. And it's so much easier just to not venture into that scary or unknown place. But I think you're right. It's like a job we're supposed to do. So
yeah.
Cool. Thank you. You know, I kind of cut you off from you talking about you. You're also obviously by the room you're in, you're a mother.
Oh, yes. Welcome to my playroom. My kids are napping, so that's where I get to do my Zoom calls. But yes, I have two kids. I have an almost 4-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. And during the pandemic, I think it shifts a lot of things for a lot of people, but that and my own life experience of losing a parent when I was young, I just kind of had these moments of prayer and reflection where I was thinking, I don't want to just be on this hamster wheel of like working and putting them in childcare and working in, and I grew up in daycare. So it's not like I have anything against people's different family choices. It was just something for me that I was like, I need to take a pause and see what's going to work for me and for as a mother and also for our family. So yeah, I resigned from my more than full-time, technically full-time, but more than full-time job.
Right. I know that. I've seen it.
Yeah. So it was good, but I was there for 10 years and I resigned just over a year ago. And so it was a big time of, you know, obviously discernment, getting to that point, and now kind of figuring out, like I would always joke with former students, like, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And now, I mean, there's definitely moments where I have that, but while I was working, I was able to do my master's in social work at UWM part-time. So I've always had that as like a tool and a resource, but I hadn't used it you know, in like a specific social work position. And so I kind of spent time thinking about that. And then ultimately, I love grief. It's super weird, probably for a lot of people.
I've never heard anyone say that.
Talking about death doesn't scare me. I think it is an inevitable part of life. And I think, especially as a younger mom, we talk so much at the beginning of life about birth or adoption and families and having showers and sprinkles or whatever, like all these things to prepare for this new person entering a family. And at the end of life, it's so silent and it's like such a sacred time. And I think we just need more ways to talk about it and to support people, not just when someone dies, but after. Like, how do you cope with that? How do you find meaning and purpose in your life again when a huge part of you has changed? And so I guess in January, so like 9 months ago, I started my own LLC where I do grief coaching, which is different than counseling because it's more of, I mean, there's similarities and I work with both and I respect both. But for me, it was more just this model of that, like checking in, whether it's like an inspirational message or text or kind of that encouraging setting goals over time and really normalizing, like, okay, what's coming up? All right, the holidays are coming up. How can we talk about that? What are traditions that happened in the past? What, you know, and also knowing that like with grief, it's so much what Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry talk about as like what happened to you versus like what's wrong with you. And so I think it's more so like a death happened to you. You're like, there might be other complications of that, but ultimately if people are able to talk about it and know that like they're okay and that some of these feelings and emotions aren't unusual, I think they can thrive or do, you know, they have permission to thrive or to like love parts of their life again. And it doesn't, and I think the other thing is, and then I'll stop talking, but that grief, it's like integrating it. It's not this isolated thing that's going to go away. It's always going to be with you. So it's figuring out like how you can integrate that into your life because of how much you loved someone, which is like a human experience. So that's kind of, so yeah, so I do that on the side now, and I'm a mom, and I'm a parishioner at St. Sebastian's, and we're newer to St. Sebastian's, but we love it because we're in the neighborhood. So,
yeah, you speak really well about grief. Most people don't want to talk about it, and I joked when you said you love grief, because it's, I mean, always feels accompanied with pain. Well, that's what I was going to say. Before you and I started recording, you and I were talking about this, and you said you use that a word that I think part of my job now is to accompany, and that's a word I think keeps popping up that I keep hearing that is really kind of, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but like just like being with someone and walking their journey with someone wherever they are and kind of just accompanying them in that place. That must take a lot of emotional energy.
Yes, I mean, I think in a lot of ways it does absolutely, to think of them and to integrate them, you know, like think of things that they might need or a whole accompaniment part of it. But I think that it's also thinking of my own life, of like people that have done that for me and that have helped like at different points in my life, like help me make big decisions or help me, or just like supported me in ways that I didn't know I needed, especially because of not having my dad. And so I think there's like you know, I don't know how life would have been different if he hadn't died suddenly, but like now that that's been more of my life than it has not been, it's also just thinking of like, how did I get where I am and what were things that helped along the way? And I think a lot of it is after the funeral, things quiet down and people don't recognize that like, oh, this is still part of you. This is part of like every decision that you make, really, like where are you going to go to school, what type of work you might want to do. Obviously those are more milestone choices, but even just on a daily basis, like if you can have great days and be, you know, feeling good for parts of it or most of it. And then there's other days where you're just like, oh, you know, just like you're sad or you hear a song or, you know, and so just being able to talk about that and not feeling like you're like walking around with this cloud, like Eeyore all the time, but it's more so just like, no, I want to tell you about my loved one, and I want to share this thing that happened today that reminded me of them. And it's not weird. It's just part of my life, and it's part of who I am. And so being able to talk about it more.
I've said this recently somewhere else. I don't remember where I said it, but grief is not linear, right? Just it bounces around and takes to whatever.
I would say like you can have I don't believe necessarily in the stages of grief. I think that like all of those emotions you could have in the same hour, or the same, and so, but I do think just like talking about how all of those things are connected, all the different feelings and emotions of grief are connected, I think is important. So that's something that I definitely, when talking with people, I'm like, oh, well, it makes sense you would feel that way, if someone's complaining about their parent or whatever the situation is. But I also think with grief, like sometimes we're just so afraid to say like, how are you really, or just in general. And people are, if you think you're going to make someone more sad by saying, oh, how are you doing without your mom or whatever. And really, it's just super validating to be like, oh, I'm not the only one that's thinking about how all of these things have been impacted because of this person no longer being physically with me.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And as you've been talking, I have been questioning, should I talk about your dad or not?
Sure.
So, I mean, you had this life experience that I'm sure was partially motivating to what you're doing now. But...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So my dad died unexpectedly when I was in 3rd grade, and I'm one of 4 girls. And so my mom raised us then and had to work obviously for income and insurance. And so I felt like at our parish community, there were different supports that helped, like what people made lunches, or like at different times we would have meals, and all of that, like I think is, in the moment you don't know what to do. And I think it's so helpful just to do something, just try it. Like if someone doesn't want it, they can tell you that, or they can throw the casserole out. But ultimately, like to express that you care about them and that you're there for them. I think that's something I learned so much from being in a parish community. And it's something that always has enhanced my faith life, because I just realized, like, even if our family didn't look the way that other families looked, there were other people that were reaching out to us and that were supporting us or giving us a ride home when we were waiting after basketball practice or whatever. And so I think that that's really the power of a faith community. And it definitely motivates my work too, especially with parent loss specifically, because I talk about other deaths too, but with parent loss, you don't know your life without your parent. Like these are people, and usually, so, like there's obviously factors that could, but I think that's like, even in like difficult dynamics, or even when there's anticipatory grief, or, where you think someone's been sick for a while, the permanence of it still is what is so jarring. And it's something that you're reminded of, not only for holidays and birthdays, but also just ordinary days. So I think just being able to talk about some of that and find ways to care for yourself in it. And it can be a way that like honors your loved one, or just something that you enjoy doing that kind of helps you. I think when you were talking earlier about just like, how do you carry both things when you're accompanying, I think for me, it's also like taking care of myself, whether that's running or reading or doing things that I care about, going outside, like outside of work, so that I can be, it's the very cliche, typical example of you have to put your oxygen mask on before someone else. So I really try to live that too.
Yeah, that's it's not cliche. It sounds like critical to the survival.
Yeah, that's true. I know. So one of my clients is like, I wish there was a different example of that. I'm like, yeah, I do too, but I just don't. That's like the only one I know of like that. Like I don't. So if anyone watching this knows
it. Yeah. Right in the comments.
Yeah.
So all of this kind of leads me to the conversation. You've absolutely touched on your faith throughout this conversation already, but maybe I give you a chance to articulate it a little more directly, what your faith, describing your faith and what it means to you, especially considering all the stuff you've gone through in your life.
Yeah. So I think for me, just from a young age, prayer was always like, that was the only way I really knew how to communicate, especially like after death, really. I mean, it was like a experience so young, but like the one thing we always did is we were always at church every weekend. So that was for me, like seeing my mom as that role model in that of like, we don't understand and this is hard, but we can take our worries, our prayers, our joy, to God. And that has always been really powerful. So I think that's been a big part of it. And then also the elements of Catholic social teaching and service, I think from a young age too, like I realized like, yes, my life was hard and this was like the cross that I was going to have to bear, but it was also realizing there are people that don't have either parent. There are people that don't have a home. There are people, there are people that struggle with addiction. And so from a young, sometimes weirdly, in my opinion, like, because then I think back to me being in like 4th and 5th grade, organizing like sandwich making or things like that. Like I'm like, yeah, but I just think like that was a big part of it was I was like, yes, this is hard, but there's other people. And that was always the connection in faith, because that's where a lot of like my service happened. And that was a lot of my community as well. And then like specifically Catholicism, as my world grew and I was more involved in different communities. Even when I was at Marquette, I was part of this Manresa Scholars program, and I had an internship at All Saints Catholic Parish, which is on 26th and Capitol. And being there for Mass, it was so powerful to hear like this incredible gospel choir and to see, but also to be helping with their meal program and to just be involved in all the ways and all the offerings that parishes have. I think for me, I was like, Catholicism, like I know that it's universal, but this is really like, this is in my city and there's so many different ways of praying and of, believing the same things and of coming together for Eucharist, but also, expressing it in slightly different ways, but learning from one another. So I think for me, what's always kept me, like in Catholicism is the universality of it and how no matter where you are in the world, there's so many different languages and songs, but that you're all coming together for the same purpose. And so that's always been something that's just like overwhelmingly powerful to me.
There's a comfort in that for me too, because that universality gives you some leeway when you find that you come across Catholics that you disagree with, that you're saying, oh, it's not a crisis.
Any of those. No, I just
you can say though, like this is not a crisis of faith. This is an opportunity for discussion or learning, growing, or sharing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good. What about your and Patrick's kind of involvement in SEBS and your connection?
Yeah, so before I knew Patrick, Patrick's my husband for any new listener, but he actually, when he was in law school at Marquette, he went to St. Seb's. So I didn't know him then, but he always like, that was the community he found when he was like in law school. So now we don't have school age kids quite yet, hopefully next year. So we're excited to be in the school community as well. But we love walking to Mass because it's right close to us. And I've started to get involved in the Facing Racism Committee, which I think is so important. I think that not only in Milwaukee, but for the entire Archdiocese, like it's so important that we're talking about these issues. Obviously part of social teachings, but also as life issues. Like we need to talk about the quality of life for all people. And so I think that it's really powerful to connect that with our faith. And so I do more of that. He's like getting involved too. I think we've only been probably a few, like maybe 3 years or 4. So it's, we have more to get involved. I always am like, I know we're going to be there for a long time, so we don't have to say yes to everything. So I think
plenty of time to suck you in.
Yeah, I know how those things can happen. So I've been trying to work on like in this redefining time, just more of like my own boundaries or just like time too.
Yeah.
So
Well, and obviously I know your skills and your background and your ministry background. And so I have had to bite my tongue a few times to say, oh, let's get Kathleen to do this.
I appreciate it. It's nice to be thought of, and I do appreciate that. But yeah, it's trying to figure out just the whole vocation of motherhood and whatever is next. So and I mean the work that I'm doing too, obviously with grief. So
yeah,
having space for it.
How does the faith you're talking about influence the work with grief, grit, and gratitude?
I think so for me, I obviously I have a theology degree. My faith is personally very important to me. I have to believe in heaven and afterlife. For me, after my dad died, there's certain things that just I never questioned in the way that I've questioned other things. And so I think I have that as a resource if people want it. But I also know that sometimes faith can be really challenging in terms of death, especially right away. Some people really go closer to it, and some people are like, this is horrible. I don't know why any God would ever do this to me. And that's the last thing they want. So I feel like I can be like a bridge and a resource, but it doesn't have to be overly religious to start. And then it can be that's part of my experience if that's ever asked in a conversation. But
I also meant, that makes total sense what you said. People are going to go towards it or away from it. But I also wondered how it informed your approach to the person you're dealing with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of my entry form questions for new clients, just to kind of know where they are in the spectrum of it. Because I don't want to, I think things like everything happens for a reason, this is God's plan, those can be really toxic and damaging. And so I know that people have good intentions when saying that, but sometimes it's we don't really know why, we don't really have the answer. And in my belief, God does, and we don't understand it, but here we are, and we're going to do the best we can. So I think that it definitely informs my practice, but a lot of my practice is listening and trying to understand where a person is in their life and the experiences that have brought them to that place, and then how their grief, the death of whomever, or just grief can be other things that aren't death, but mainly I focus on death, but how that's informed their life. So yeah, so
that makes sense. I'm glad to hear you say that I'd never heard anyone say this is happening for a reason as a toxic thing, but I think you're right. Because people are trying to comfort with that statement, and it often will do the absolute opposite of that.
Yeah, and sometimes I think we say things because it makes us feel better, but it's not actually what the person needs. And so it's kind of just seeing if someone wants to tell you a million stories about that you've heard before about their person, then being that space versus being annoyed, is your ministry to them. Versus if you ask and someone doesn't want to, then ask again, or write a card, or do something, pray for them, so there's other ways of supporting them too. But I think it's more so just talking and listening and knowing that just because it's hard doesn't mean it's bad. And a lot of times when we can acknowledge the hard, we're able to grow more together. So
yeah, well said. This is a total aside, but you're not, it looks like half of you is
I'm shining.
It's the sunlight coming. God is shining down.
Yeah. It was all your questions about
my last question I ask everyone is, when you think about the future, Kathleen, what do you hope for?
I hope that we can start listening more to the different perspectives. I don't think that one side is all right, and one side's all wrong right now. And I think it saddens me how divisive our community, our world has become. And yeah, so I hope that we can come together and that we can listen for the greater good of the next generations. I think it'll take, obviously, communities like St. Sebastian to do that, and a lot of courageous conversations and hard, smaller actions. Like there's not going to be like a one big quick fix, but I think that we really need to keep working on this and not just like cancel anyone that thinks differently or anyone that is or isn't wearing a mask or is or isn't vaccinated. Like, I think that it's just becoming, we're not seeing the humanity in other people or like what forms them anymore. It's more just like, you're in this box, you're in this box. And so I will talk to you, I won't talk to you. And I think that's going to be the most problematic part of the next years and maybe forever if we don't figure out ways of saying, oh, this is why I don't agree with it, but this is why you think this way, but there's still good in you. And I want to honor that.
Yeah, everyone has like a reason or a path that they got to whatever their stance that they've dug into is, right? And there's rationale for it. And we often make assumptions about what that is, and we don't ask and try to figure out what it is. And I mean, I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty of it.
Oh, totally. Me too. But I also try and have friends on all sides. So it just helps. It's hard because there's times where I'm just like, this is really stressful or this is really a really tough conversation. But I think it does help just kind of knowing like it's not that far removed from you.
Right. And again, it takes more energy to engage that way. It's a lot easier just to be with the people that are think like you and agree with you. It's not probably the right way.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my hope. Let's come together and keep working to making the world better for the next generation. But especially in Milwaukee, I know I was just at the bell tower lighting, and I loved all the analogies just about it being a beacon of hope and just the light that it can be. And I think that's one of the things that makes me so attracted to St. Sebastian is like before diversity was something that everyone was talking about, they were already doing it and living it and just leading by example. So I think it can only be enhanced from there.
Yep. Good image. I like that. Kathleen, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You're a great talk show host.
It's my missed calling. That's what I know. No, you spoke so well about your faith and the work you're doing, and continued success in your grief work, especially as you accompany people.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.